Welcome back, everybody. This is Dan for Dan's Racing and Simulations. Thanks so much for joining in with me for today's video. So, I wanted to quickly comment on the fact that my cat was walking around in my last video. I did not realize that until after I was editing the video, and a lot of you saw that he was walking around, and a lot of you commented on it, and that was hilarious to me, so that was pretty funny. If he happens to walk in and I see him today, I'll pick him up and I'll introduce you to him. I don't know if he's going to come in here or not, but the door is open where he can. So I got a lot of requests on last video for me to show you guys the special host of last week's show. This is the cat that was walking around that I did not know was walking around behind the camera. This is Bubbles. He is my little buddy. Everybody say hello, and he wants to get down, so I'm going to put him down now. But for today's video, it's going to be a little bit different. I wanted to tell you the story of how I got into sim racing, because a lot of people always ask me, how did you get into sim racing? Or what makes you like sim racing so much? Or did you play some other kind of game before you started sim racing? And the answer is yes to all of those, basically. So I wanted to do like a little story time kind of and tell you guys how I got into, or how I got to the point of where I am now, which some people would say is excessive when it's dealing with gaming in general or sim racing. And I know a lot of you out there share that same passion with me and probably sim race just as much, if not a lot more than I do. So I thought it would be cool for me to tell you my story of why I sim race so much now. And to tell you that story, I kind of have to go way back. Because like many of you, I'm sure, my passion for sim racing was stemmed by a lot of other things that I did throughout my life. And basically all were around the passion and the love for cars and speed. As far back as I can remember, when I was a very, very young child, 4 or 5 years old, I loved cars. I had to have the little die-cast toys, the little models. Anything that my parents would give me, I loved dealing with cars. I remember vividly seeing cars on the road and being, interested in them long before most children should care about what a car is. And so I just had this general passion for cars, and I always have. I also, which I think coincides with that, especially for guys a lot, the passion for wanting to be able to feel speed. Although many of us don't actually get that feeling until much later in life, we all have this rush, this need for speed as very young kids, and I was no different. So I grew up playing with Matchbox cars and playing racing games, and I got really into racing games when the Gran Turismo series came out. That was probably on PlayStation 1. And that game just got me hooked. I absolutely loved that game. It was very hard to get me to go outside when that game was out and available to play, because all I wanted to do was hop in that game and tune cars and customize cars and see how fast I could get around the track. I don't know if you guys remember this, but some of you are old enough to remember the first couple renditions of Gran Turismo. They had a used car lot, which would circulate various cars into that used car lot that would be cheaper than buying a brand new car. And some of the used cars in that car lot were cars you couldn't even get in the new car lots. So I thought that was pretty cool. That's something that I think a lot of racing games are missing today. And I really wish that the Gran Turismo series, at least at a minimum, would bring that back. I do really love that. But anyways, I spent loads and loads of time with my face buried in that game. And that is probably where my first passion for racing and cars in a game came from. It stemmed from me not being able to actually get my hands on and drive these real cars. One, because I was far too young. It would be years later that I actually got my driver's license and could drive. And two, we just didn't have access to that kind of stuff. And so that was my outlet for speed. It was going and playing that game. Now, I do remember I finally got my first real introduction to speed, or at least I thought back then it was speed. I remember my parents finally got me this go-kart that I wanted for years. I asked for it for years and years and years. When I was growing up, my parents didn't have a whole lot of money. They got me, you know, they saved pennies up to get me anything I wanted. And now looking back on it, I appreciate that greatly, and probably a lot more than it seemed like I did then. But, you know, even though we didn't have tons and tons of money, they always eventually got me everything I asked for. And, you know, that's just something that I appreciate to this day. But so I finally got this go-kart that I really was wanting. And when I first got it, I got it for a birthday. I remember this so vividly. I had the biggest birthday party I think I ever had in my entire life that year. I had loads of people come over, friends from school, friends from the neighborhood, and I had no idea when I invited all these people that I was going to be getting this go-kart. Had I have known that I was going to be getting a go-kart for that birthday, I wouldn't have invited anybody, because all I wanted to do as soon as I saw that thing unwrapped was hop in it and go take off around the neighborhood. And so that's exactly what I did. You know, I got that go-kart. It had a little, I think it was a 5 horsepower Briggs & Stratton engine. It was just a little single-seater, but it was so much fun. That was my first taste of actually sitting in the cockpit of something and really driving and giving it my all. We had about an acre and a half of land, and I had, within the first couple of days, I had this path, like a rally course, carved into the ground all the way around the property we had, and I went around and around and around and just rutted that path in through ditches, through the woods, you name it. It was so much fun. And then eventually my parents allowed me to get out on the street and go ride around with my friends, and that led us to tinkering with that go-kart. And what we ended up doing was messing with the governor. There was a little piece of metal, and we used some Southern engineering, and we bypassed the governor, and we just had that little 5 horsepower go-kart screaming, and it was probably only going 35 miles an hour or something like that, but it felt like I was flying through the roads of that neighborhood. And that was the first time I really got that feeling of being physically driving something, and that really pushed that passion where before I was only able to do it as a game. It really pushed that passion of really wanting to drive, and my love for driving just grew and grew and grew. So I pretty much went through all the Gran Turismo titles as they came out throughout the years until I got my driver's license. When I got my driver's license, that was the first time I was actually legally allowed to drive by myself. And from that day on, I stopped gaming. Once I had my driver's license and I was able to drive around wherever I wanted to go, gaming, it just stopped happening. You couldn't even get me to stay home. My parents bought me, or actually they had it, it was a hand-me-down, but it was a 1991 Chevy S10 single cab short bed truck. It was not a race car, but I drove it like it was a Formula One. It was a 5-speed manual transmission. It had a tiny little 6-cylinder motor in it, but they put exhaust on it. They painted it black. I thought I was the stuff. And I drove that truck everywhere, and I drove the wheels off of it. So I drove that truck for a long time, and I loved driving. I probably drove it ways that you shouldn't drive it, and I hate to even admit that. But I didn't even think about really playing games again for years until I was actually involved in a pretty bad car accident. I was getting ready to be a sophomore in high school, and I was a passenger in a vehicle, and we had a very bad car accident. No fault of the driver. It was raining, and we hydroplaned, and I actually had some very substantial injuries. And those injuries put me back on my butt for a very long time. We're talking about months that I really couldn't get up and do a whole lot. There was a lot of rehab and rehabilitation, and that was a very stressful part of my life and for my family. But that was where I got back into gaming. So because I couldn't drive yet in the real world, I got back into gaming. And that's about the time I got hooked on the Gran Turismos again. And that's when I really started taking some of my attention started going to Forza Motorsports on the Xbox. And at that time, comparing the two, Forza Motorsports actually, to me, was a little bit better. I don't remember if it was Forza 1, Forza 2. I really don't remember the time frame in there because a lot of this just blends in and it's just one kind of blended in timeline. But I do remember at some point in time during that problem when I was sitting there not doing anything, I ended up making the switch from when I was doing Gran Turismos over to Forzas. That's also the time that I made the transition from being a PlayStation lover to an Xbox lover. Forza Motorsports single-handedly changed my mind in the PlayStation to Xbox little war they have had going on for years. And once I moved over to Xbox, I never turned back. I haven't had a PlayStation in years and years and years, and it's all because of the Forza franchise. So anyways, that unfortunate wreck is what got me back into racing, and I pretty much played on and off forever. Now, you guys know, you probably don't know my exact age, but I'm in my mid-30s now, but I never stopped racing games. I always raced games, but it wasn't until about maybe, probably 2009, 2010 maybe, I decided that I wanted to really get serious in some kind of competitive racing. Well, the problems that I had at that point in time were that I had finally realized the point in my adulthood that my dream of having Lamborghinis and my dream of racing for GT3 sports teams, it was not going to happen. You know, it takes a very long time for some of us adults to realize that that dream probably is just not going to happen, and you eventually kind of smooth right into real life, and that's what you end up doing, is you just do real life. And so I knew I wanted some kind of competitive something in my life dealing with the love and the passion that I had for cars and racing. And so I went and purchased my first wheel and pedal set, which was a Thrustmaster TX wheelbase. And I think I got a GT, some kind of, it was a Wheel Stand Pro. I got a Wheel Stand Pro, the Thrustmaster TX, and that was it. And I hooked all that stuff up, put it in the living room, and for about a year, I kind of raced somewhat competitively on Forza Motorsports. And had some fun doing that, but there was always something missing for me. There was always, you know, it was hit or miss whether or not you'd get a good race. You'd have some good races, and then you'd get in a lobby that was just terrible. And I got really frustrated with that. So up until this point, I was never a PC gamer. I didn't even think about it. As a matter of fact, my profession, my job, had me sitting at a desk in front of a computer all day. So the last thing that I wanted to do when I got home was get back behind a computer and play games. So I just ended up always being a console user. But when I decided it was time to make a change and move into something more hardcore, as the term I'll use it, I started doing some research and trying to figure out what in the world, what was the next step up from your Forzas? What was the next step up from your Gran Turismos? And that's when I found Inside Sim Racing. That's when Darren and Sean were pretty much running it together. And I learned so much from those guys. And I just watched video after video, and I was astonished because I had no idea that this sim racing thing even existed. And basically, long story short, what I did was I just figured out what kind of PC you had to have, figured out what game I wanted to play, which at the time was iRacing. That was what I didn't care about anything else. I honestly didn't even know anything else existed. I was just making my move from consoles over to iRacing, and that was my intent. That was my intention. So I went out and bought a bunch of stuff. I got 3 monitors. I got a computer to push 3 monitors. I went out and got a better set of pedals. I got all this stuff, hooked it up, hooked up the computer, and got on iRacing and was instantly hooked. While this was going on, I had already started this YouTube channel, and I was making YouTube videos to begin with on Forza Motorsports. So that's how these two things tie in together. I was making videos on Forza Motorsports, and then I made the move over to PC sim racing, and I also at that time changed the channel direction from Forza stuff over to PC sim racing. You guys have heard me talk about that before, so I'm not going to talk about that in this video, but I just wanted to add that little point in. But yeah, basically ever since then, it was probably 2012, 2013 or something like that. I haven't actually been doing it that long. But I got into it at that time, and I just stuck to it, and I just read all the blogs I could read. I watched all the videos I could watch, and just started sim racing like every night just about for years, you know. And so I very quickly gained a lot of skill, and I gained a lot of, not necessarily skill, but knowledge on how to succeed. And that's what reflects in the videos that I make for all of you guys that are watching this. It's what I learned from doing all that research. But yeah, this video kind of went maybe a little bit outside of what I was wanting to talk about. It didn't stay in the line that I was hoping for, but I think you guys get the point. My sim racing hobby that I love right now, it stemmed from, I think, my passion for cars. You know, that's what it was. It was my passion to have that speed, you know, that want to be faster, that want to race. And, you know, I just never, like 99% of the people in the world, never got to the point, and will never get to the point, I'm sure, where you can go drive for a racing team in real life or be able to afford some crazy Lamborghini or stuff. So, you know, that I get that need that I have, that urge for speed and stuff now through sim racing, and it does a great job. I'm perfectly satisfied with it. If I never drive a Lamborghini, I'm fine with that. If I never drive for a racing team, I'm fine with that too, because I love sim racing and I've got a lot of time and a lot of money invested in it. And it all stems from my passion of cars. So I just wanted to make that video. Hopefully this is interesting to some of you. I know all of you it probably will not be that interesting too, but hopefully some of you kind of enjoyed this. And that's how I got into sim racing. It was kind of a love and a passion for cars ever since I was little enough to remember anything, you know. That's the first thing that stuck in my brain as a child of something I was interested was cars, cars, cars. And all through growing up, I remember vividly that, you know, every year there was like a new car that I was like, oh, I'm going to have that when I'm old enough to drive. That IROC Z, I'm going to have that when I'm old enough to drive. Or that Mustang or that Lamborghini, you know. Of course, some of those things were very far-fetched. Now, in life, I did end up getting a lot of the cars I did want. I've had multiple Mustangs, some very fast ones, some not fast ones. I've had Camaros and Trans Ams and Eclipse turbos, and I've had a lot of really, really fun cars, and I've spent a lot of time driving and just enjoying the car community and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, when it comes to being smarter about budgets and stuff like that, blowing a lot of money on cars, you eventually, when you get as old as I am, and probably the older I get, the more wiser I'll get, you realize that those expenses don't make that much sense. And that's why I drive a 2015 Ford Focus SE now as my daily commuter. It's not fast. There's nothing special about it, but I do really love it. And I get my fix of racing and my fun, both sim racing and making these videos for you guys, because I really enjoy doing this too. So let me know in the comments, guys, how you got into sim racing. I'm curious, and we can have a discussion about it down there. And that's about it. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, guys. Thanks so much for watching as always, and I will see you in the next video.